The wind came screaming across the Montana plains like a wounded animal, tearing through the cottonwoods, devouring every sign of life in its path. By midnight, the land was nothing but a white, howling void. And somewhere in that blizzard, half buried, half alive, a lone Apache woman staggered toward a light she wasn't sure was real. Snow whipped against her face like shards of glass. Taya pulled the torn hide cloak tighter around her shoulders, but the cold was merciless. Her boots, cracked and stiff, sank deep into the drifts. Every breath burned her lungs. She had walked for miles, maybe days, she couldn't tell anymore. Hunger had long turned to nausea, and her body moved now only because something inside her refused to die. A thin line of light blinked through the snow ahead, faint, golden, trembling. A house, maybe. A barn. Or the doorway between life and death. She stumbled toward it, whispering a prayer in Apache under her breath, words she hadn't spoken since her village burned, and Izoni, guide me home. The storm roared in answer. When she reached the gate, her knees gave out. The iron bars were coated in ice, the name, Caldwell Ranch, barely visible beneath the frost. She pressed her forehead to the cold metal. Her fingers slipped, and she crumpled to the ground, a dark shadow swallowed by snow. Inside the ranch house, Thomas Caldwell stood by the window, jaw tight, watching the storm swallow his fences. He'd lived through plenty of Montana winters, but this one felt meaner, hungrier. He poured black coffee into a tin cup, the kind that never cooled fast enough, when something outside caught his eye. A shape. Moving. Then falling still. He set down his cup and grabbed his coat, muttering to himself, no fool would be out in that. But he went anyway. The cold hit him like a fist when he opened the door. He trudged through the snow, lantern in hand, and there she was, half buried, half frozen, her skin pale beneath streaks of ash and blood. For a second, he thought she was gone. Then her lips moved, barely a breath, please. He didn't think. He just acted. Thomas lifted her into his arms, surprised at how light she was, nothing but bone and will. He carried her through the snow, his boots crunching steady and sure, like the heartbeat of a man who'd seen too much death to let another one happen tonight. Inside, he laid her near the fire, stripped off her frozen cloak, and wrapped her in wool blankets. The flames flickered against her face, copper-toned skin, sharp cheekbones, a single braid half undone by the wind. She wasn't like anyone he'd seen in town. Apache, by the looks of her. The thought made his gut tighten. Folks in Bitter Creek didn't take kindly to her kind. Hell, neither did he, once. But watching her chest rise and fall in shallow, desperate rhythm, he felt something he hadn't felt since the night his wife died, the heavy, unmistakable pull of responsibility. Behind him, small footsteps creaked on the stairs. Papa? It was Daniel, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Who is she? Thomas looked down at the woman by the fire. Outside, the storm screamed against the windows like a living thing. Someone the wind tried to kill, he said quietly. And we're not gonna let it. The boy stared, wide-eyed. Thomas turned back to the fire, the heat biting at his hands. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or what kind of trouble followed her. But one thing was clear as the snow piling outside his door, fate had just left a stranger on his porch, and the whole damn winter was about to change. The storm died sometime before dawn, leaving the world outside buried in silence and snow. Inside the Caldwell Ranch house, the fire still glowed low in the hearth, throwing soft orange light across the worn floorboards. Taya stirred. Her lashes fluttered open, and for a moment she didn't know where she was. The warmth, the scent of wood smoke, the faint creak of timber, it all felt unreal after days of bitter wind and hunger. Then pain came rushing back. Her hands, cracked and swollen. Her legs, heavy as stone. She tried to sit up, but the sudden movement made her head spin. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, and the air bit cold against her skin. Easy now, came a voice, deep and steady. Thomas Caldwell stepped out of the shadows near the stove, a mug of coffee in one hand, his other resting on the back of a wooden chair. He was tall, broad through the chest, with the kind of strength that comes from years of working cattle and cutting fence wire. His face carried the harsh lines of the frontier, weather-beaten, proud, and watchful. "You're safe," he said, setting the mug down beside her. "You've been out for near half a day." Taya blinked at him, her brown eyes cautious. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. He frowned slightly. "Why what? Why'd you bring me here?" Thomas shrugged. "Because you'd have frozen out there." She studied him for a long moment, unsure whether to believe him. Her people had learned the hard way what happened when they trusted white men with kind eyes. He seemed to sense the thought behind her silence. "You can rest easy. I don't mean you harm," he said, though his voice carried a note of authority that brooked no argument. Before she could answer, the thump of small feet came from the stairs. 2 boys appeared, one tall and serious, the other small and bright-eyed. "Papa," said the older boy, Daniel, his tone wary. "She's awake." The younger one, Samuel, leaned around his brother, curiosity shining. "Is she an Indian?" Taya's jaw tightened. Thomas shot the boy a look sharp enough to stop him mid-breath. "Her name's Taya," he said firmly. "And she's our guest until the road's clear." He turned back to her. "That is your name, isn't it?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Taya," she repeated softly, as if reminding herself she was still alive. Samuel grinned. "Taya. That's a good name." Daniel didn't smile. His gaze flicked from her rough hands to the old leather pouch beside the hearth. "Where'd she come from?" he asked his father. Thomas didn't answer. "Go help your brother feed the horses," he said instead. "And mind your manners." When the boys were gone, the silence between them grew thick again. The only sound was the wind sighing against the windows. "You can stay until you're strong enough to travel," Thomas said finally. "After that, I'll see you get somewhere safe." "Somewhere safe," she echoed, almost bitterly. "You mean somewhere far away?" He looked at her then, really looked. "You've had a rough go of it, I can tell. But this place," he gestured toward the snow beyond the window. "It's not easy for anyone. You pull your weight, you'll have no trouble here. I don't need charity." "Didn't offer it," he said simply, reaching for his coat. "There's stew in the pot if you're hungry. I'll be out checking the fences." He left before she could say another word. Taya sat there for a long time, watching the door he'd gone through. She could still feel the weight of his stare, the way he'd looked at her like a man trying to solve a puzzle he didn't ask for. Her eyes drifted toward the window. The world outside was pure white, endless, and cold. In the distance, she could see the barn and 2 small figures trudging through the snow, the boys. Samuel turned back and waved. For the first time in weeks, Taya felt something stir inside her chest. It wasn't warmth, not yet. But it was close. She wrapped the blanket tighter, lifted the steaming mug of coffee, and whispered to the empty room. "Maybe I can make it through one more winter." But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. This house wasn't just her shelter from the storm. It was the beginning of another one. A quiet, human storm, made of mistrust, pride, and hearts that had forgotten how to thaw. The days after the storm crawled by slow and gray, the kind of cold that froze your breath before it hit the ground. The land lay quiet under 2 feet of snow, every fence post and cedar tree buried in white silence. Inside the Caldwell ranch, that silence had its own weight, thick, polite, and uneasy. Taya kept mostly to the corner near the hearth, mending what she could find, patching a torn glove, boiling water for coffee. She moved with quiet purpose, light-footed and cautious, like a deer learning to trust the wind again. Thomas said little, just short nods and the occasional, "You need anything?" before heading back out into the cold. The boys, though, were another matter. Samuel followed her everywhere, full of questions, chattering like a jaybird. Daniel hung back, studying her with those wary, storm-gray eyes that reminded her too much of his father. One morning, as Thomas came in from the barn, his boots leaving long streaks of snow on the floorboards, he found Samuel sitting cross-legged by the fire while Taya taught him to braid a piece of rawhide. "It's like weaving the wind," she said, her voice soft, patient. "You twist it wrong, it breaks." Samuel's tongue stuck out in concentration. "Like this?" "Better," she said, smiling just a little. Thomas stood there for a moment longer than he meant to, watching the strange gentleness between them. It had been a long time since laughter, real laughter, had filled his house. When Taya noticed him, she stiffened, her hands dropping the braid. "The boy wanted to learn," she said quickly, as if she'd overstepped some invisible line. He nodded. "He needs teaching. There's no harm in that." But his voice came out rougher than he intended. He wasn't used to explaining himself, to anyone. That evening, the wind rose again. Snow rattled the windows, and the air turned mean and sharp. Thomas poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her at the table. "You planning to head east once it clears?" he asked. Taya stared into her cup. "East, west, it doesn't matter. My people are gone. The soldiers burned our camp last summer. I have no tribe left to go to." The words landed heavy between them. Thomas rubbed a hand over his face. "You'll freeze if you travel alone. Territory's no place for a woman without kin." She lifted her gaze to meet his. "I've been alone a long time, Mr. Caldwell." He looked at her then, not as a stranger, not as a burden, but as someone caught in the same cold he lived with every day. "You're a strong woman," he said finally. "But strength won't keep you warm through another winter." He paused, thinking, weighing words like stones in his hand. "I've been giving this some thought," he said. "I've got 2 boys need raising. A house that needs a woman's touch. I'm offering you a place here, not as a guest, but as my wife." Taya's head jerked up. "Your wife?" He nodded, steady and calm, as if discussing fence repairs. "It's not about love or any of that foolishness. I don't expect that. You need shelter, I need help running this place. We make it through the winter together." For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of the wind in the chimney. "You'd marry an Apache woman?" she asked quietly, disbelief and hurt mixing in her voice. "You take the wrath of your town for that?" Thomas leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "They already whisper when I walk into church. Let 'em talk. I stopped caring what Bitter Creek thinks a long time ago." Her eyes searched his, looking for mockery, for pity, found neither. Just a man worn down by life, practical to the bone, but still holding on to a small scrap of decency. "I can't promise to be the wife you expect," she said finally. "I'm not expecting anything but honesty," he replied. "You do your part, I'll do mine. That's all I'm asking." She stared into the fire. It crackled and popped, the flames licking at the logs like restless spirits. She thought of the nights she'd slept under trees, her stomach empty, her heart colder than the ground beneath her. And she thought of this house, warm, solid, alive with the laughter of 2 boys who looked at her like she might belong here. When she spoke, her voice trembled only slightly. "I'll think about it." Thomas stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "Storm still blowing," he said. "No need to decide tonight." As he turned toward the door, she said, almost to herself, "Sometimes the wind brings more than snow." He paused, glanced back at her, just once, and gave a quiet nod. Neither of them knew it yet, but that night, while the wind howled around the house, the deal that would change both their lives had already begun to take root in the stillness between them. The wind still prowled across the plains, low and mean, even after the storm had passed. Days bled into one another, quiet, colorless, and cold. Snow pressed heavy on the roofs, and the fences wore a hard crust of ice. Inside the Caldwell ranch, life moved at a slower rhythm, like the land itself was holding its breath. Taya had begun to walk again, though her legs still ached from frostbite. She stayed close to the stove, mending clothes or peeling potatoes, keeping her hands busy so her mind wouldn't wander too far into memory. Sometimes she caught the boys watching her, the older one, Daniel, with that guarded, skeptical stare, and the younger, Samuel, with eyes full of unfiltered curiosity. When she smiled at Samuel, he grinned right back. But Daniel looked away, pretending he hadn't been staring at all. Thomas noticed, though he didn't say much. He was a man who measured words like grain. Most days he spent outside, mending what the wind broke, counting cattle, or chopping firewood until his shoulders shone with sweat despite the cold. Every evening he'd come in, stamp the snow from his boots, and nod a quiet thank you when Taya handed him coffee. They didn't talk much. But there was something in the silence, something steady, something that wasn't there before. That night, the cold came in harder than usual. The moon was swallowed by clouds, and the temperature dropped so fast the windows frosted from the inside. Thomas came back from the barn late, shaking snow from his coat. Cold enough to freeze the horns off a bull, he muttered, hanging the coat on a peg. Taya was at the stove, stirring a pot of venison stew she'd made from leftovers. The smell filled the room, earthy, rich, alive. She turned, caught off guard by his voice. "You should eat," she said softly. He nodded, sitting down without a word. The house creaked as the wind pushed against it. For a long while, they ate in silence, the fire snapping in the hearth. Then, Thomas set his spoon down and looked across the table. "I've been thinking," he began. Taya froze, her spoon hovering above the bowl. His tone wasn't casual, it had that deliberate, weighted sound men used when they were about to change the shape of something. "I can't keep running this place alone," he said. "The boys need raising, and the house, it needs a woman's hand again. Winter's too damn long to live with ghosts." She frowned slightly. "You're not alone. You have your children." He nodded. "They need more than me. They need warmth. They need teaching. They need," he stopped, his jaw tightening. "They need someone like you." Her heart skipped. "Like me?" "I'm not saying it pretty," he said, his voice rough. "But I mean it plain. You've got no people left, no home to go back to. And I've got a house too big for one man and two boys. We could fix that, for both of us." She stared at him, uncertain she'd heard right. "You're offering marriage?" Thomas met her eyes. "I'm offering partnership. I won't pretend it's about love. I don't have room for that kind of dreaming anymore. I'm offering shelter, safety, and my name. In return, I ask for your help, with the boys, with the house, with this life." The fire cracked between them. The orange glow made his face look older, carved with the kind of honesty that left no space for charm. Taya's throat tightened. "You take an Apache woman as your wife?" He didn't blink. "I don't care what the town says. Folks in Bitter Creek have been talking about me since the day Margaret died. Let them keep talking." The words hung in the air, strong and dangerous. She looked away, her gaze drifting to the frost on the window. Marriage, she thought. A white man's word for belonging. Her people had their own way of binding souls, but most of them were gone, burned or buried under the same kind of snow that had nearly taken her. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "You don't know what I've done to survive." "I don't need to," he said. "All I need to know is that you're standing here, alive, and you've got fight in you. That's enough for me." The silence stretched again. Outside, a wolf howled somewhere beyond the ridge, a long, lonely cry that echoed through the night. Finally, Taya said, "I need time." Thomas stood, slipping his coat back on. "Take it," he said. "The storm's not done yet, and neither of us is going anywhere. He paused at the door, looking back once. When you're ready to give me your answer, I'll be in the barn. The door closed behind him, leaving Taya alone with the hiss of the fire and the echo of his words. She touched the rough wood of the table where his hand had rested, still warm. Marriage. Partnership. Survival. She whispered the words to herself, testing their weight. Outside, the wind howled again, cold, wild, and relentless. But for the first time, she didn't feel like the storm was trying to kill her. It was simply waiting to see what she'd decide. When the snow finally began to melt and the trails opened again, word spread fast through Bitter Creek: Thomas Caldwell had married an Apache woman. By noon, the gossip had already reached every corner of town, from the general store to the saloon to the church steps. Folks whispered over whiskey glasses and wagging tongues. Some said he'd gone mad since his wife died. Others called it sin. A few just said he'd lost his damn mind. Thomas didn't answer to any of it. He stood tall when he brought Taya and the boys into town for supplies, though he could feel the stairs burn holes in his back. He'd been through worse than small-town judgment. But seeing Taya walk beside him, her head high and proud despite the whispers, stirred something deep in his chest, something halfway between anger and admiration. The clerk at the store, old Ben Porter, gave a stiff nod when they walked in. "Afternoon, Caldwell," he said, his voice dry as dust. His eyes flicked toward Taya and then away again. "What can I get for you?" "Flour, coffee, kerosene, and some sugar for the boys," Thomas said evenly. Ben moved slower than usual. When Taya reached for a bolt of cloth, his hand shot out first. "Don't touch that," he snapped. "It's for sale." Thomas's jaw tightened. "So's her money," he said, setting a few silver coins on the counter. "You got a problem with it?" The store went quiet. Every man in the room froze, pretending not to watch. Ben cleared his throat, suddenly busy with his ledger. "No problem," he muttered. Taya didn't flinch. She took the fabric, calm as a river stone, and folded it over her arm. But later, when they were riding home in the wagon, she said quietly, "You shouldn't have done that." He looked at her. "Done what?" "Defend me like I'm helpless." Thomas frowned. "I wasn't defending you. I was setting things straight." She shook her head, her braid swaying against her shoulder. "Where I come from, people learn to stand alone. It's the only way to survive." He didn't answer. He just flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled on through the mud and melting snow. Back at the ranch, the boys were quieter than usual. Daniel, the older one, had been watching everything. That night, while Taya cleared the table, he lingered by the fire, his small hands clenched at his sides. "You shouldn't be here," he said suddenly. Taya froze, a plate still in her hand. "Why do you say that?" He met her eyes, his father's eyes, only younger and angrier. "You're not my mother. You'll never be her." The word stung sharper than she expected. But she didn't raise her voice. She simply set the plate down and knelt beside him. "No," she said softly. "I'm not trying to be." Daniel's throat worked, like he wanted to say more but couldn't. Then he turned and ran up the stairs, his footsteps echoing through the house. Taya stayed there for a long while, staring at the floor. When Thomas came in from the barn, he found her still kneeling, the firelight dancing across her face. "He doesn't mean it," he said gently. "He's just holding on to what he remembers." She stood, her voice steady but low. "A child shouldn't have to choose between love and loyalty. But that's what you've asked him to do." Thomas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't ask for any of this to be easy." "Neither did I." They looked at each other across the quiet room, two strangers bound by the same roof, the same loneliness, and a promise neither was sure how to keep. Outside, the first thaw of spring dripped from the eaves, steady and slow. The land was waking up again. But inside the Caldwell house, something colder than winter still lingered. And though Taya had found shelter from the storm, she was learning fast that the fiercest battles weren't fought against the wind or snow. They were fought inside the walls of a man's heart. The first warm winds of spring rolled over the plains, but inside the Caldwell house, the air was still thick with winter. The snow had melted, the fences were mended, and the calves were bawling in the pasture again, yet something colder than frost still lived within those wooden walls. Taya could feel it everywhere she went. In the way Daniel avoided her eyes. In the silence that fell each time she entered a room. In the photograph of a smiling blonde woman hanging above the fireplace, Margaret Caldwell, the ghost who owned every shadow in that house. She found her one afternoon, without meaning to. The old room at the end of the hallway had stayed closed since Taya arrived. The door creaked when she pushed it open, the air stale with dust and perfume long faded. Inside, time hadn't moved an inch. Dresses hung behind glass like relics. A porcelain brush sat beside a mirror that had forgotten how to shine. On the dresser stood a small cradle, covered with a faded blue quilt. Taya stepped closer, brushing her fingers over the fabric, soft as breath. Then came a sound behind her, a sharp intake of air. Daniel stood in the doorway, fists clenched, eyes blazing. "Don't touch that," he shouted. Taya froze. The boy's voice cracked under the weight of something too big for him to carry. "I wasn't. I was just." "She was my mother," he said, his voice trembling now. "You don't belong in here." Taya swallowed the sting rising in her throat. "You're right," she said quietly. This was her place. "I'm sorry, Daniel." But the boy had already turned and bolted down the hall, his small boots pounding against the wooden floor. Taya stood alone for a long while, her reflection trembling in the dusty mirror. She could almost feel the eyes of that woman in the photograph watching her, not with hate, but with sorrow. That night, when Thomas came in from the barn, the fire was burning low. He found Taya sitting at the table, her hands clasped tight in her lap. "Something happened?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "The room at the end of the hall, the one with the cradle. Daniel found me in there." Thomas sighed heavily, pulling off his gloves. "I should have locked it up. That room's been shut since," he stopped, rubbing his jaw. "Since before she passed. I didn't mean any harm." "I know," he said. "But to Daniel, that room's all he's got left of her." Taya nodded slowly. "I understand." He poured himself coffee, then looked at her across the table. "You've done good here. The boys are fed, the house is clean, and I haven't had to sew a damn button in weeks. But this house, it's full of ghosts. Not just hers. Mine too." Her eyes lifted. "And you think I can chase them out?" "I think maybe you already have," he said softly. "But it'll take time for the rest of us to notice." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled between them, throwing amber light across the worn floor. Then came a small sound at the stairs. Daniel, barefoot and pale, hovered in the doorway. His eyes darted between them. "I didn't mean to yell," he muttered. "Mama's room, it's just hard." Taya rose slowly, moving toward him. "I know, Daniel," she said, her voice warm, gentle. "I'll keep the door closed. I promise." He nodded, then turned back upstairs without another word. Thomas watched the exchange, quiet as always. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of respect, maybe even gratitude. As Taya sat again, she felt the tightness in her chest ease just a little. The wind outside rattled the shutters, but inside, something fragile and new had taken root. Not forgiveness. Not yet love. But perhaps the beginning of peace, the kind that comes when ghosts finally stop screaming, and start listening. By the time summer rolled over the Montana plains, the snow had long melted into green valleys and restless rivers. The land was alive again, hawks circling the sky, cattle lowing in the distance, and the smell of sage carried by the wind. But even as the world bloomed, the folks of Bitter Creek still found something cold to cling to: talk. They said the Caldwell Ranch had gone strange. That Thomas Caldwell, a decent man, once respected, had lost his mind for good. That the woman he'd taken in wasn't really his wife but some heathen squaw living under his roof. Taya heard the whispers every time she rode into town. They didn't need to speak loud, she could feel them, like thorns pressing through her skin. Still, she held her head high, shoulders straight, moving with quiet dignity. She'd endured worse things than gossip. That Sunday morning, Thomas decided the whole family would go to church. Taya hesitated, looking at her reflection in the cracked mirror, dark skin against pale fabric, a borrowed dress hanging loose around her frame. "They won't want me there," she said softly. Thomas buttoned his collar, meeting her eyes through the mirror. "We don't live for what they want," he said. "We live for what's right." When they rode into Bitter Creek, the town fell near silent. Even the horses seemed to shift uneasily. Taya stepped down from the wagon, dust catching the sunlight on her braid. She felt every pair of eyes cut into her, the preacher's wife clutching her child, the shopkeeper turning away, old men whispering on the steps. The church bell tolled, sharp as judgment. Inside, the pews creaked as they took their seats. The preacher's voice droned on about grace and forgiveness, but no one looked their way. Taya sat still beside Thomas, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating fast. When the service ended, the crowd funneled out into the dusty street. A woman in a bright blue bonnet leaned close to another and said just loud enough, "A fine thing, bringing one of them into the Lord's house." Taya caught the words. So did Daniel. The boy's face darkened. Before Thomas could stop him, Daniel spun and shouted, "She's better than any of you." His voice cracked, trembling with anger and pride. "She's my mother." The street went silent. Thomas stepped forward, placing a steady hand on his son's shoulder. His gaze swept across the crowd, sharp, unflinching, the way a man looks at wolves circling his herd. "You all know me," he said, his voice calm but heavy. "You know what kind of man I am, what kind of work I do. This woman's my wife. She's earned her place here, same as any of you earned yours. Anyone's got a problem with that can take it up with me." The words hung in the air like thunder before rain. No one answered. Not the preacher. Not the men on the porch. Not even Ben Porter behind the store window. Thomas turned, tipped his hat to Taya, and led the boys back toward the wagon. As they climbed aboard, Taya's heart swelled, not with triumph, but with something steadier, something warm and unfamiliar. She looked at Daniel, who sat straight and proud beside his father, and whispered, "Thank you." He shrugged, cheeks red. "They don't get to talk about you that way," he muttered. On the ride home, the sky stretched wide and golden above them. The ranch waited on the horizon, bathed in light, alive with promise. Taya glanced at Thomas. The hard lines of his face had softened. His hand rested loosely on the reins, his eyes on the long road ahead. For the first time since the day she'd stumbled through his gate, she felt something close to belonging. The storm between them had quieted, though far from gone. And as the wind carried the scent of prairie grass and wildflowers through the air, Taya realized something she hadn't dared admit before: this wasn't just a place to survive. It was slowly, stubbornly, becoming home. By late summer, the plains had turned gold. The wind carried dust instead of snow now, and the days burned long under a sun that refused to quit. Life on the Caldwell Ranch had finally found its rhythm, fences mended, cattle fattened, boys growing strong again. But peace on the frontier never lasted long. It started with the little things. A missing cow here. A broken gate there. Then one morning, Thomas found hoofprints cutting through the far pasture, prints that didn't belong to any of his horses. When he knelt to study the ground, Taya came up beside him. She'd been out gathering wild herbs by the river, her skirt damp at the hem, her braid heavy with morning mist. They rode through last night, she said quietly, kneeling beside him. 3 men, maybe 4. They didn't move like ranchers. He glanced at her. How can you tell? Their tracks don't wander, she said, tracing the trail with a finger. They moved straight, quick and quiet. Men used to stealing, not hurting. Thomas rose slowly, the lines in his face tightening. Rustlers. She nodded. And they'll be back. That night, the ranch lay under a heavy silence. The boys were asleep upstairs, but Thomas and Taya stayed up by the fire. He cleaned his rifle, the metal catching the firelight. She sat nearby, mending a shirt, though her needle barely moved. You've lived through worse, he said after a while. Yes, she answered softly. But every kind of danger feels different. This one smells of greed. He looked at her then, his eyes steady. You're not afraid. I've learned fear don't change much. It just makes you slower. Thomas let out a low chuckle, the first real one she'd heard from him in weeks. You talk like a soldier. I was raised among warriors, she said. We learned early that a quiet night is never truly quiet. He nodded, respect flickering behind his tired eyes. Outside, the coyotes began their song, long, lonesome cries floating across the dark hills. Thomas set his rifle aside and stood. I'll ride the south fence at dawn. If they come again, I'll be ready. I'll come with you, Taya said. He hesitated. You don't have to. I know, she said. But I will. The next morning, mist lay thick over the valley. The grass glittered with dew, and the world felt too calm, too still. They rode in silence, the horses' hooves muffled by the soft earth. When they reached the far ridge, Taya lifted a hand, signaling for him to stop. Look, she whispered. Below them, by the dry creek bed, a group of riders crouched beside a fire. 3 men, rough and dust-covered, their horses restless and lean. The kind of men who lived on the edge of the law, and often beyond it. Thomas clenched his jaw. Cole, he muttered. That son of a gun's been running trouble since Dodge. Do you know him? Used to, Thomas said. Now he's the reason I keep a rifle by my bed. Taya's gaze stayed fixed on the men below. They'll hit tonight. Thomas nodded grimly. Then we make sure they regret it. By sundown, the sky burned orange over the hills. Thomas had the boys bedded down early, their window shutters closed tight. Taya helped him bar the doors and set lamps low. When the dark settled, she joined him on the porch. The air smelled of sage and danger. You ever get tired of fighting? She asked quietly. Thomas didn't answer for a long moment. Every day, he said at last. But I fight anyway. For them. For this land. She looked at him, her face half hidden in the firelight. And for me? His eyes lifted to hers. Yeah, he said softly. For you too. Somewhere out in the darkness, a horse neighed, quick and sharp. Taya's hand went to her knife. Thomas reached for his rifle. The quiet before the storm had come again. And this time, it wasn't made of snow. It was made of men. The sky turned black before the last light left the hills. A dry wind swept through the valley, carrying the scent of dust and distant thunder. But it wasn't a storm coming, it was men. Inside the Caldwell Ranch house, the lamps burned low, their glow flickering across the walls. The boys were asleep upstairs, unaware of the danger creeping closer. Taya stood by the window, her fingers resting on the curtain. Beyond the fields, she could see faint movement, shadows where there shouldn't be any. They're here, she whispered. Thomas stepped up beside her, rifle in hand. His face was grim but steady, carved from the same stubborn courage that built his life from dust. Keep the boys safe, he said quietly. Taya's eyes flashed. And leave you to die alone. Not tonight. He looked at her, really looked, the woman who had once stumbled half dead through a snowstorm now stood like a warrior in his doorway. For a moment, he wanted to tell her to run, but something in her gaze stopped him. She wasn't asking permission. Outside, hooves struck the earth like thunderclaps. 3 riders came fast down the ridge, lanterns swinging from their saddles, firelight dancing across their faces. Thomas recognized the lead man immediately. Cole Turner. They'd worked side by side once, back when both were younger, hungrier, and meaner. But where Thomas had built a home, Cole had chosen the outlaw's road. Caldwell. Cole's voice cut through the dark, rough and mocking. Heard you took in an Apache woman. Thought I'd come pay my respects. Thomas stepped out onto the porch, rifle steady, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of the house behind him. You rode all this way just to talk, Cole. Cole laughed. Talk. Hell, I came to collect. That land of yours, railroad wants it bad. They're paying good money for folks to move along quietly. Thomas spat in the dirt. You tell them I'm not selling. Not for them. Not for you. Cole's grin faded. You always were a stubborn bastard. The gunfire started before the words had finished echoing. Bullets tore through the night. Wood splintered. Windows shattered. Taya dragged a heavy table in front of the door, her heart pounding. Upstairs, the boys woke to the sound of chaos. Stay down, she shouted, grabbing her revolver from the mantel. Through the smoke and gunfire, she saw Thomas crouched near the porch post, firing back. The muzzle flashes lit his face in quick bursts, fierce, determined, alive. A bullet smashed through the window near her head. She dropped to her knees, rolled toward the door, and fired twice into the darkness. A scream followed, one of the men went down. Another burst of shots came from the barn. The hay had caught fire, orange flames licking up into the sky. Smoke poured over the fields, glowing against the night like a rising storm. Thomas, she cried, bursting through the door. He was out front, reloading fast, blood streaking down his arm. Get back inside. I'm not leaving you, she shouted, her voice cutting through the roar of the fire. A rider charged toward him, gun raised. Before Thomas could turn, Taya lifted her revolver and fired. The man dropped from his saddle, hitting the ground hard. Thomas glanced back at her, eyes wide, breath ragged. You ever miss? She smirked, smoke curling around her face. Only when I mean to. The fight dragged on for what felt like hours, the air thick with gunpowder and ash. One by one, the attackers fell or fled into the burning fields. By dawn, only silence remained. The barn was gone, reduced to smoldering black timbers. The fences were broken, the yard littered with shells and hoof prints. Taya sat on the porch steps, her hands trembling now that the danger had passed. Thomas limped over and sank down beside her. His shirt was torn, his shoulder bleeding, but he was still breathing. You saved my life, he said quietly. She shook her head. You saved mine first. For a moment, neither spoke. The sunrise crawled over the horizon, painting the ranch in pale gold. Smoke hung low over the fields, curling upward like ghosts finding their way home. Thomas glanced toward the house where the boys still slept. They'll be scared when they wake, he said. They'll see 2 people who stood their ground, Taya answered. He looked at her then, eyes soft beneath the weight of exhaustion. You belong here, Taya. Don't let anyone tell you different. Her hand found his, rough against rough, and for the first time since the world had turned against her, she let herself believe it. The night had nearly burned them to ashes, but what rose from those ashes was something stronger than fear, stronger than fire. Something that might, in time, become love. Dawn came slow and pale over the blackened land. Smoke still drifted in thin ribbons from what was left of the barn, curling into the sky like a prayer the wind refused to carry. The ground was littered with burned boards, shell casings, and the quiet aftermath of men's greed. Taya stood barefoot in the yard, her dress streaked with soot, her hair tangled and heavy with ash. The air still smelled of gunpowder and loss. But the ranch still stood. The boys were safe. And Thomas. She turned toward the porch. He sat slumped against the post, a blood-soaked bandage around his shoulder, pale from the night's fight but still stubbornly alive. His rifle rested across his knees like an old friend. "You need to rest," she said, walking up to him. "I'll rest when the fences are back up," he grunted. She knelt beside him, her eyes soft but firm. "You can rebuild a fence with two good hands, Thomas. Right now, you've got one." He gave a tired half-smile. "Always did like a woman who argues sense." Taya looked out over the field, where the sunrise glowed faintly against the ruined ground. "They'll come back," she said quietly. "Men like that don't take losing kindly." "Let them," he said. "This land's all I've got left, and I'll die before I let anyone steal it." Her gaze shifted to him. "You almost did." He met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something unguarded there, a flicker of fear, not for himself, but for what he could have lost. Later that day, after the boys had been fed and the fire rekindled, Taya tended to his wound. She cleaned it carefully, her fingers steady despite the exhaustion. He winced once but didn't pull away. "You've got the touch of a doctor," he said, trying to lighten the air. "I've patched worse," she replied. "Apache women learn quick, there's no doctor when bullets fly." He studied her face, the calm in her voice, the grace in her hands. "You saved us, Taya. You and that steady aim of yours." She smiled faintly. "You saved me first, remember? Fair trade." He shook his head. "No. You've done more than I ever asked for. More than I deserved." For a long moment, there was only the crackle of the fire between them. Then Thomas spoke again, quieter this time. "When Margaret died, I thought that was it for me. Thought God had taken the only good thing he'd ever given me. But then you came through that storm." He paused, voice roughening. "Maybe it wasn't a curse after all. Maybe it was a second chance." Taya's hands stopped moving. The words hung in the air, fragile and real. She met his eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, the kind of understanding that didn't need language. "I don't know about second chances," she said softly. "Where I come from, we just call it surviving." He nodded. "Then maybe we're both survivors." As evening fell, the two boys joined them on the porch. Daniel handed his father a tin cup of water, while Samuel leaned against Taya's side, sleepy but safe. The sky bled orange and violet across the plains. "Are we gonna fix the barn, Pa?" Daniel asked. Thomas looked at Taya, then back at the boy. "Yeah, son," he said. "We'll fix it. All of it." Taya watched the horizon, her heart steady. The land had taken so much, blood, sweat, and pride, but it had given her something back, too. Not comfort. Not peace. Something deeper. Something earned. When the wind picked up again, carrying the smell of sage and charred wood, Thomas reached for her hand. She didn't pull away this time. Their fingers intertwined, rough, scarred, honest. The world around them was scarred, too. But from ruin, something new was taking shape, something stronger than the walls they'd lost. And as the last light of day faded, Taya realized that for the first time since her tribe's fall, she wasn't just passing through someone else's story. She was home, not by blood, not by birth, but by choice. Spring returned to the valley the way forgiveness sometimes does, slow, quiet, and almost without notice. One morning the frost was gone, the air smelled of new grass, and the rivers ran fat with meltwater. Life had pushed through the ashes again. The Caldwell ranch was alive. Chickens clucked in the yard, calves stumbled after their mothers, and the hammer of Thomas's repair work echoed from dawn to dusk. The barn stood once more, smaller than before, rough around the edges, but it was theirs, built plank by plank, sweat by sweat. Taya stood by the fence one afternoon, the wind tugging at her braid, watching Samuel chase a chicken through the yard while Daniel tried not to laugh. The boys were different now, taller, tougher, carrying the kind of calm that comes after facing fear and surviving it. Thomas walked up behind her, wiping his hands on a rag. "Fence is near done," he said. "Another week and we'll have the place back in shape." She smiled. "You always were a man who builds faster than he heals." He looked at her, brow raised. "You saying I'm still broken?" "I'm saying we all are," she said softly. "But broken things let the light in." He laughed under his breath, the sound low and easy. "You talk prettier than any preacher I've heard." She turned toward him then, eyes steady, warm as the April sun. "That's because I don't preach, Thomas. I just live." That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridgeline, the family gathered on the porch. The sky bled gold and rose over the plains, the same land that had tried to kill them and then, somehow, taught them to live. Thomas sat with his arms slung around the back of the chair, his shoulder still stiff but healing. Taya sat beside him, her fingers brushing over his knuckles, a quiet, wordless bond. The boys were leaning against the rail, whispering and laughing in that secret way children do when the world finally feels safe again. For a long while, no one spoke. They just listened to the hum of crickets and the wind moving through the tall grass. "You ever think about leaving?" Thomas asked suddenly. Taya tilted her head. "Where would I go?" "Back to your people. Back to what you knew." She looked out at the wide horizon, where the last bit of light clung to the hills. "My people are the wind and the stars, Thomas. They're with me wherever I go. But this," she gestured toward the house, the boys, the barn rebuilt from ruin, "this is where my heart stayed when the snow melted." He nodded, quiet. "Then I reckon we're both where we belong." She smiled faintly. "You reckon right." Later, when the boys had gone to bed and the crickets grew louder, Thomas spoke again, his voice lower now, almost shy. "When you came here that winter, I thought you were just a lost soul I pulled out of the storm." "And now?" she asked. "Now I know you were the one who pulled me out of mine." The fireflies blinked across the fields, tiny lanterns floating in the dusk. Taya leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time, Thomas didn't feel the cold of the past, only the warmth of something he thought he'd buried long ago, peace. When dawn came, the ranch glowed beneath a soft mist. The wind rolled gentle over the grasslands, carrying the smell of earth, pine, and home. Taya stood on the porch with a cup of coffee in her hands, the rising sun painting her face in gold. The horizon stretched endless, wild, and free, the same world that had once chased her, now finally hers to keep. And as the light spread across the land, she whispered to herself, half prayer, half wonder. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to find where you truly belong. Then she turned, smiling as Thomas stepped through the door behind her, the boys laughing inside. The storm had brought them together. The fire had tested them. The land had shaped them. Now, they were more than a rancher, an Apache woman, and two boys trying to survive. They were a family, forged in winter, made whole by love. And maybe that's the question this story leaves behind. When life burns everything you know to the ground, would you have the courage to rebuild, not just your home, but your heart?